I'm prone to hyperbole, and I've been known to make up some stuff to make a story sound a little bit better, just for entertainment value. But this is neither of those. What I'm about to say is neither of those things. This morning, I literally woke up with Final Fantasy VII music playing in my head. I'm not sure why. I mean, I saw the announcement trailer a couple days ago, and I don't feel like I really thought about it at all yesterday. But when I woke up this morning, that was the first thought that went through my head. Now, this is not the Final Fantasy VII that I played back in the 90s. And that's a good thing. In fact, I really do think that it's a good thing that this is going to be a different game. Now, if you had asked me a few months ago, or, well, not a few months ago, let's say if you'd asked me a few years ago, hey, would you like them to just do nothing except for update the graphics for Final Fantasy VII? I would have said yes. But the graphics, and to be fair, Final Fantasy VII is a fantastic game. The graphics don't hold up. If that's all that they did was update the graphics, I would have said that's great. Because I've never been one to shun a game for subpar graphics, but, having better graphics is always a good thing, as long as it doesn't detract from anything else in the game. Now, when I saw the trailer, the first thing that I thought was, this seems a lot more like an action RPG instead of a JRPG. And I find that very intriguing. My initial reaction was, I'm a little worried here. But the more that I think about it, the more interested I become. I'm very interested to see how they can change the game systems while still giving you that same strategic feel. And that is what I'm really hoping for, is that they still have the strategic feel to the game. I hope it feels strategic and not too, what's the word I'm looking for? Button mashy. I don't want it to feel button mashy where I'm hitting a bunch of buttons nonstop. That's not cool. I hope it feels strategic. And Final Fantasy VII did feel strategic. You looked at the monster that you were up against, and you had to make the decision about which magic ability you were going to use to best take that enemy out. You got to learn how the different enemies interacted in the battle system so you could anticipate the best way to counterattack against them. And that was really what drove that game. Now, can they still make a game that drives you with that same strategic feel, but have more of an action-based combat? And that's a question that I don't know, and that's a question that needs answering. Now, why am I talking about it today? I'm talking about it because they recently announced that Final Fantasy VII Remake is going to be released in chapters. Now, to me, this says one thing. Square needs more time to finish their game. I think that Square has finally realized one of their biggest shortfalls, and that's that Final Fantasy games just take way too long to come to market. Final Fantasy games are known for being these massive worlds with hundreds of hours of gameplay awaiting the player and the protagonists. They're also known for being some of the best looking games at the time of their release. And if you put these two things together, they make putting out a Final Fantasy game a massive, very difficult undertaking. And I can understand why it takes them so long to put these games out. The amount of time that elapses from one game to the next is way too long, or at least that's the public perception. Now, I really don't agree that it's too long. I don't want an annualized version of Final Fantasy, but I do think that they could do with a little more rapid development. Now, there's three things that I think that they could do to fix this. Number one, first and foremost, is stop announcing your games so early. Square is really bad at this. As soon as they put out a sign that says Final Fantasy with a number after it, the gaming public wants news. They want it bad. They want as much information as they can get. By announcing games way too early, it does kind of buoy the stock for Square a little bit, but I think in the long run it works against Square as it builds hype way too far out. You want the hype to come at the right point for your game. Look at the way that Fallout 4 did it. They announced their game. They said it's coming in November, and everybody was flabbergasted. Nobody expected the game to come out that soon, with their announcement being that day. And not only that, not only did they announce it and say that it's coming out in a short few months, they also said, and hey, look, we even have a little bit for you to play today. An iOS game that's related, that you don't need to buy, and it's not going to take your wallet out in the back and shoot it behind the woodshed. Fallout Shelter, they released that, and they said, and that one is available today. They knew how to build the hype. Square's really bad at building the hype. They don't time it right. And I'm not sure if that's a Western versus an Eastern kind of thing. So, like I said, Square's building their hype too far out, and I think it's much better to announce a game when you have something substantial to show, not just a name in a fancy font. The next thing that I think that they could do to fix this perception that their games are taking too long to make is have multiple teams. I'm not a developer. I don't know if Square is already doing this or not, but if they aren't, then they should. These games are very, very far apart. Like I said, it's not a bad thing, and I am against annualizing games, but I think that they are too far apart. And because they're too far apart, it's very difficult for Square to time things right. If they had another team working on the next Final Fantasy, like having two Final Fantasies under development at the same time, then maybe they could have them be 3 or 4 years apart instead of the ridiculous amount of time that they have now. Now, I honestly don't know off the top of my head, and I could be wrong about this, but the amount of time that passed from Final Fantasy 13, and then, well, they had 2 sequels to that, which was really still using the same engine, I believe. But if we were to say from 13 to 15, not counting 14 because 14 is an MMO, I would say it's got to be like almost 10 years, maybe? I could be wrong. Please let me know if I am. But I think that they're just too far apart. Now, the third thing that they do, and this is clearly what Square has chosen to do, is to put out their game one chapter at a time. This could be a really good move. However, it all comes down to pricing. Now, for me, when I think about a game from Square, I think about Final Fantasy, and I also think about the fact that when it came out on my iPhone, Final Fantasy VI, I said, hey, $17 for Final Fantasy, that's a steal. No problem. I'm buying it. Then the iPad was released, and Apple made it so that you could release universal games, so that you could download it once and it would work on both systems. Now, Square decided not to do that. They didn't make a universal app, which would have been fine, except that the game was $17 in a sea of 99-cent games. And it kind of feels the customer makes the customer feel like they got ripped off. At least that's the way it made me feel. Yes, the game is worth $17, but to charge me twice for it just kind of felt slimy. It's like selling me a game and then paying attention to what TV I hook it up to it. Oh, wait, you hooked it up to a bigger TV. Well, let's go ahead and get some more money out of you. It doesn't seem right, and that kind of gives me a sour taste in my mouth when it comes to money and Square Enix. So here's the question. This is the question. This is the big question. This is the question of the day. How is Square? Do you talk about them like they're a group of people, in which you would say are, or do you talk about it like it is one person, in which you would say is? People who are good at grammar, let me know. So how is Square, I'm pretty sure that's the right way, how is Square going to charge for this? And now there's a couple different ways that I think that they can go. For me, I think the best way to do it is you charge one price that gets you the whole thing. Maybe it's $60, maybe it's $70, I'm not sure. But one price gets you the whole thing and you pay for it up front. Then as the chapters are released, you get them for free. I think that this is the best model. With this model, Square's going to get their entire revenue from the player right up front, and it will offset the cost of making the game. The one downside is they had better finish the game, though. If they decide that it's no longer profitable to work on it, you can't just cut it off in the middle of it, especially with a remake, because we already know how the story goes. So we'll know if they've changed it a bunch because they wanted to shorten how long the game is in order to increase profits. That would be very bad if they did that. I personally think that this is the best model for Square to follow. You pay it all up front, and then they piecemeal it out to you one little bit at a time. Now, is this as good as you pay for it and you get the whole game right away? No. But it also means that you get the game sooner. So, gamers are in an impatient bunch, so it might be good for those gamers. I would prefer to wait. But we know that Square is not going to wait. We know that they're putting the game out in chapters. So that's one way of going about doing this. Another way that they might do this is to put out the game in chapters and charge a fee for each chapter. This would also be fine for me, as long as they communicate how much each chapter is, as well as how many chapters they're going to be in the game. Think of it this way. I'm playing through my Final Fantasy VII game. I get to a certain point and I've decided, you know what? I've gotten all I really need to out of this game. I'm going to stop buying the chapters as they come out. So now it gives a little more freedom for the players to decide how much of the game they're going to buy. That is also a really good way to do it. The problem is, and this is what I worry, is that they're going to split the game into, let's say, 50 chapters at $5 each. I don't want to pay that much for Final Fantasy VII. As much as it's one of my favorite games of all time, I worry that Square is going to do this kind of thing. Okay? I think that they might charge a lot more money than they should for this game, which tells me, and the reason that this is so bad, I mean, for any other game that wouldn't be a big deal, but people will buy a Final Fantasy game. And I think Square knows this. And Square could set a new pricing precedent with this game. That's the problem. If people line up and do it for Final Fantasy, then other companies are going to look at this and say, hey, look at that pricing model that they just did. We can copy that and get a whole bunch of money. And now we are really hurting. Because I know that games, because of inflation, games have actually gotten much cheaper as time goes on because they have not kept up with inflation. But to me, games are still an expensive hobby. And that idea that they could become more expensive really kind of makes me nervous. The next thing that I want to say about the chapter system that they're working on is that Square said that each chapter will be very different from the last. This sounds really, really cool. I like the idea that each chapter could have a different battle system in it, maybe. I mean, they didn't expressly come out and say that, but for me, that's the first thing that came to mind. There's two ways this could go. This could be amazing, or it could completely backfire. By releasing the game in chunks, Square could get feedback from the community about what they do and don't like about the game. I could see them making changes to the battle system from chapter to chapter, which on the face of things sounds good, but I also think this design by committee paradigm isn't really the best way to go when it comes to a video game. I prefer to have somebody in charge to say, this is how it's going to work, and I'm not going to have everybody getting input on this, because too many cooks in the kitchen really kind of make me worry. Too often people say that they want a certain thing only to find out that when they get what they want, it just doesn't work how they imagined it, or they didn't look at the consequences that it would have to the rest of the game. So the idea that players are going to have some input here would make me nervous, because I think that players, for the most part, make terrible decisions. I know I do sometimes. Sometimes I'm sitting there playing a game and I'm like, man, I really wish that we could have this in my game. And then somebody will say, well, what if we had that? Then this other thing would happen. And I have to sit back and say, oh, you know what? That's right. It's a good thing I'm not in charge of games. So this could lead, if this were to occur, if it would start out really bad, or not really bad, but if it were to start out with a really great battle system and then slowly get changed over time, it could either lead to a lot of people playing for the first few chapters only to dump the series later as the changes to the battle system move further and further away from concise design goals, or it could lead the other way to where it really continually increases the amount of people playing the game because the battle system is being fine-tuned to make some really, really fun gameplay mechanics. There's no way to know ahead of time which way it's going to go. I hope that it's the latter. Anyway, that's it for my thoughts on Final Fantasy VII review. I'd really like to know what you think about Square's Final Fantasy VII announcement, so let me know what you think below.